Something has shifted. You can feel it in the undercurrent of the world, like a subtle tremor passing through the collective dream. People wake up at night with a weight they can't name. The sky looks the same, the streets are the same, yet something inside the pattern has gone offbeat, like reality itself is stuttering. You scroll, you watch, you listen, and the speed of everything feels wrong. News flashes like lightning, burning through attention spans before they can form meaning. Trends rise and die before they even become familiar. Technology evolves faster than the nervous system can adapt, and we're left chasing the shadows of our own creations. It's not just chaos, it's acceleration. And beneath that acceleration, there's a sense that something fundamental is approaching a threshold. Terence McKenna once said that culture is an engine of habit, a way to keep the human animal from staring too long into the abyss. But the engine is breaking down. The routines that used to make sense, career, nation, belief, progress, are losing their coherence. We used to believe time moved in a straight line, from past to present to future. But what if that's the greatest illusion of all? What if time is not a line, but a wave, a fractal, curling in on itself? Each moment folding into the next, each cycle smaller, faster, more intense than the one before. What we call the future might just be the compression of all possible futures, spiraling toward a singular point. And in that compression, what we experience as reality breaking down may simply be reality speeding up beyond our ability to perceive it smoothly. Look around, and you can see it everywhere. The edges are blurring. Politics dissolves into theatre. Truth splinters into countless micro-realities. Even language, the very thing we use to hold our world together, has begun to fracture. Words no longer describe, they signal. Conversations don't connect, they collide. It's as if the collective mind is glitching under the pressure of its own complexity. We are witnessing what McKenna called the ingression of novelty, the arrival of something so new, so unprecedented, that the structures of the old world can no longer contain it. But most people can't name what's happening. They just feel it, a low-frequency anxiety that hums beneath the surface of daily life. The sense that we're living inside a simulation that's starting to reveal its seams. Digital ghosts of ourselves drift across networks, echoing thoughts that algorithms learn to predict before we even think them. Every click, every gesture, every sigh becomes data in the system's dream. We built machines to reflect us, but they've begun to mirror our inner fragmentation instead. And now, the mirror is cracking. You might have noticed how time feels different. Weeks vanish. Months feel like minutes. The boundaries that used to separate events now dissolve into one long, continuous moment. McKenna believed that this acceleration was not random, that it was intrinsic to the universe itself. From the Big Bang to the birth of life, from tribes to cities to the digital web, each phase of existence happens faster, denser, with more connections than the last. Evolution, culture, information, all of it follows the same pattern, exponential compression toward an endpoint of unimaginable transformation. He called this the fractal acceleration of time. And when you understand it, the chaos of our world begins to make a strange kind of sense. Think about it. 1 billion years to create life, a few million to create intelligence, 10,000 to create civilization, 500 to create science, a century to create technology, a few decades to create the internet. And now, we're moving so fast that history itself is folding in on the present. The future no longer arrives from ahead, it erupts from within us. We are standing inside the shockwave of time's own awakening, and that's why reality feels unstable. The human nervous system evolved to navigate forests, not data streams. The psyche was built for tribal stories, not planetary ones. We were never meant to hold this much information, to process this many simultaneous narratives. The collapse of meaning isn't the end of the world. It's a signal that the map no longer fits the territory. What we are witnessing is not destruction, but compression. The universe is condensing into a higher order of complexity, and the human mind is the membrane through which that passage occurs. When the caterpillar begins to dissolve, it must feel like dying. Everything it knew as itself, its form, its motion, its reality, liquefies. And yet within that chaos, something deeper is at work, reorganizing the material into wings. Humanity is entering its chrysalis phase. The confusion, the fragmentation, the sense of unreality, it's all part of the transformation. But because we're inside it, all we can feel is the dissolution. McKenna's insight was radical because it reframed apocalypse not as an event of destruction, but as a process of metamorphosis. He called it the transcendental object at the end of time, a kind of attractor pulling every moment, every thought, every particle of existence toward a final state of infinite connectedness. In this view, the sense of breaking reality is not a malfunction, but the symptom of nearing that attractor. The old systems, social, political, personal, are being stretched to their limit, unable to handle the intensity of novelty entering the field. The cracks are not flaws, they are openings. We stand at the intersection of two modes of being, the linear and the fractal, the stable and the transformative. The linear mind insists something is wrong, that we are losing control. The fractal mind whispers that control was never real, that what's coming is a greater coherence we can't yet perceive. Every revolution, every technological leap, every cultural upheaval is the same story told through different masks, the universe exploring new degrees of freedom within itself. And when those explorations converge, when every form of novelty collides, something entirely new must emerge. Perhaps that's why so many people feel alienated now. We are tuned to frequencies our ancestors never knew existed. The noise we call confusion may be the sound of evolution happening in real time. To the caterpillar, the hum of transformation is unbearable. To the butterfly, it is the sound of flight. And so, as reality trembles and the walls of meaning shake, the question isn't whether the world is ending. It's whether we can expand fast enough to meet what's arriving. The cracks in the simulation are not signs of failure. We imagine it as a straight line, a one-way corridor from the past through the present towards some distant, unknowable future. It's comforting that way. It gives us the illusion of sequence, of cause and effect, of progress. But look closely, and that simplicity begins to dissolve. The more we study nature, consciousness, and the patterns of change, the more it becomes clear that time is not linear at all. It is recursive, self-similar, alive. It loops back on itself, like a snake devouring its own tail. Terence McKenna saw it not as a river, but as a fractal wave, a structure repeating at every scale, each epoch a microcosm of the whole. The patterns of galaxies birthing and dying mirror the cycles of civilizations rising and falling, which in turn echo the thoughts that flash and vanish within a single human mind. Everything is nested. Everything is rhythm. The universe is learning to speak through finer and finer frequencies. McKenna believed this acceleration wasn't random. It followed a precise geometric law, a fractal descent toward a singular moment he called the end of history, not as in destruction, but as in culmination. Imagine a spiral drawing closer to its center. Each loop represents an era, each smaller than the last, until the loops blur into one infinite vibration. From the Big Bang to the present, reality has been increasing its density of novelty, the amount of change, information, and creativity per unit of time. The curve is exponential. That's why everything feels faster, more chaotic, more overwhelming. We are riding the crest of time's own self-compression. You can sense it in the way we experience a day now. What once filled a decade can unfold in an afternoon. The human nervous system strains to keep up. We can scroll through more faces, stories, and tragedies in a few minutes than our ancestors encountered in a lifetime. The nervous system wasn't designed for this saturation, but the pattern of evolution doesn't ask permission. It simply amplifies complexity until a new adaptation appears. Just as single cells learn to cooperate into multicellular life, just as tribes merged into civilizations, consciousness is being forced into a higher mode of coherence. What we call the digital age is not technology overtaking humanity. It's the next stage of the fractal, the cosmos reorganizing its awareness through us. Yet from the inside, this acceleration feels like breakdown. We call it anxiety, burnout, information overload, cultural collapse. But that's only because we still think of time as linear. In a linear world, acceleration feels like a fall. In a fractal world, acceleration is simply the spiral tightening toward transformation. The intervals between revolutions shorten until the revolution becomes continuous. That's what's happening now. The revolution of novelty is no longer a historical event. It's the background hum of existence itself. Every system is vibrating faster. Ecosystems, economies, memes, thoughts. The boundaries that once separated them blur into a single global feedback loop. This is why old paradigms are cracking. Linear institutions, governments, religions, markets were built on the assumption that change happens gradually, that stability can be maintained by control. But control is an illusion in a fractal universe. You can't manage an exponential curve by linear logic. Every attempt to stabilize the old order only increases the turbulence. The more we cling to the past, the more violently the future demands entry. This is not punishment. It's the natural rhythm of evolution. The same way a heartbeat alternates between contraction and release, so too does history pulse between order and chaos, integration and expansion. Each contraction brings the possibility of a new coherence, a new phase of being. If you look at the world through this lens, the madness begins to make sense. The simultaneous rise of artificial intelligence, global ecological awareness, psychedelic revival, political polarization, and digital collectivism isn't coincidence. It's synchronization. Each of these phenomena represents a different aspect of the same process. The universe complexifying itself toward higher consciousness. Technology externalizes the nervous system. Psychedelics internalize the cosmos. Both collapse the boundaries between inner and outer worlds, between self and system. In that fusion, novelty multiplies. McKenna called this tendency the conservation of novelty. Nothing truly disappears, it only reappears at a higher frequency. The shaman's vision becomes the internet. The tribal drumbeat becomes the algorithmic pulse. The ancient cave painting becomes virtual reality. Every epoch replays the same motifs, but faster, denser, more self-aware. And as the fractal tightens, history starts to feel less like a timeline and more like a single multidimensional event, slowly revealing its full geometry. We can even feel this on the level of individual lives. Personal transformations, once taking decades, now occur in months or weeks. People awaken, collapse, rebuild, and reinvent themselves in endless microcycles. Relationships form and dissolve at the speed of signals. Identity becomes fluid, no longer a static object, but a dynamic pattern of updates. This can feel disorienting, like losing a sense of continuity, but continuity itself was always an illusion. The self, like time, is fractal, an ever-evolving hologram whose fragments all contain the image of the whole. If you listen closely, there's a rhythm beneath it all, a strange attractor drawing everything toward a point of convergence. McKenna imagined it as the transcendental object at the end of time, but it could just as easily be understood as the awakening of the planetary mind. Each pulse of acceleration brings us closer to total connectivity, not only through data, but through empathy, awareness, and the recognition that consciousness is not isolated within individuals, but distributed across the web of being. The planet itself is trying to remember that it is one organism, and humanity is the neural network through which that realization dawns. The fractal nature of time means that what we experience as chaos is the repatterning of order on a higher octave. The acceleration of novelty does not destroy meaning. It refines it, compresses it, forces it to crystallize into purer forms. The challenge is that our perception lags behind the pattern. We interpret each pulse of change as disaster, because the human ego clings to the illusion of stability. But if we could step outside our linear perception, we would see a vast mandala unfolding. every crisis an intricate tessellation within a greater design. Time, then, is not something moving past us. It is something blooming through us. We are the organs by which the universe experiences its own acceleration. The collapse of boundaries, the overwhelming pace, the dizzying sense that everything is happening at once. All of it is the signature of the fractal coming into focus. To resist it is to remain trapped in the old geometry of fear. To surrender to it is to participate consciously in evolution itself. So when you feel the pressure of the world tightening, remember, this is what it looks like when the spiral nears its center. Every pattern, every paradox, every fragment of history is converging into a single luminous point where time, mind, and matter become one continuous gesture. Reality isn't breaking, it's revealing its true shape. The future isn't coming, it's already here, cascading backward through the folds of the present, whispering that the straight line was never real. The fractal has always been the secret rhythm of creation, and you are standing right where it curls back into itself, on the edge of transformation, inside the beating heart of time. Every civilization believes it is the final one. Every culture assumes its worldview is the solid ground beneath all others. Yet every system of meaning, no matter how vast or sacred, eventually dissolves into something stranger, more complex, more inclusive than itself. What we are witnessing now, the disintegration of institutions, the erosion of truth, the collapse of narratives, is not an accident or a sign of failure. It is the natural death throe of an outdated paradigm. The old story of reality, the linear, mechanistic, progress-driven illusion, is cracking apart under the pressure of its own contradictions. And through those cracks, something luminous is beginning to seep in. For thousands of years, humanity built its world around stability, religions that promised permanence, economies that worshipped growth, politics that pretended control was possible. We inherited the Cartesian belief that the world was a machine, predictable and separate from us. But now, that machine is sputtering. The tools that once empowered us, technology, language, reason, are now outpacing our ability to integrate them. The map no longer fits the territory because the territory itself has become fluid. The old coordinates of identity, nation, and belief are being swallowed by an ocean of global connectivity. We're drifting without a compass because the very idea of a fixed direction belongs to the past. This dissolution is terrifying precisely because it undermines the illusion of certainty. When the known collapses, the ego panics. It tries to rebuild, to reassert control. It searches for new dogmas, political, spiritual, or technological, to fill the void. But all these attempts are fragments of the same decaying story, the belief that meaning can be manufactured externally. McKenna understood this collapse not as a mistake, but as an inevitable stage of planetary metamorphosis. The collective psyche, he said, is shedding the skin of its old myths. We are entering what he called a psychedelic society, not in the sense of mass intoxication, but in the literal meaning of the word, mind manifesting. The structures of the world are mirroring the structures of the mind, revealing their fluid, hallucinatory nature. The breakdown of the outer world is the unveiling of the inner one. You can see this in the way language itself is beginning to fall apart. Words that once united now divide. Meaning, which was once stable, now slips and mutates with every retweet, every meme, every algorithmic remix. We live in a linguistic Babel where truth is no longer anchored. And yet, beneath that chaos, something revolutionary is happening. The failure of language exposes its limits. It reveals that reality cannot be fully captured by symbols. McKenna often said that language is the first technology, but it's also the first cage. Now, that cage is rusting. The collective consciousness is groping for a new syntax, something non-linear, image-based, multidimensional, a language of intuition rather than argument, of direct experience rather than description. The psychedelic revolution, the rise of virtual reality, the explosion of art that defies logic, all of these are signs that we are outgrowing linguistic reductionism. The universe no longer wants to be told. It wants to be felt. The senses are reclaiming their primacy over abstraction. And in that return, the human being is rediscovering itself, not as a detached observer, but as a participatory node in the great field of being. This is why the collapse of old structures is painful. We are losing the illusion of separation, the comforting fiction that the self stands apart from the world. The old paradigm, the one that divided matter from spirit, subject from object, man from nature, is dissolving like a mirage under the light of a new perception. And so the systems that depend on that illusion are unraveling. Our economies are collapsing under infinite growth models that ignore ecological boundaries. Our political ideologies are imploding because they were built on opposition, not integration. Even our religions are decaying, unable to contain the multiplicity of human experience in the age of information. The internet has made everyone a prophet and every belief a fragment. The sacred is no longer hidden in temples. It's scattered across networks, encoded in memes, whispered through pixels. But the sacred hasn't died. It's being redistributed. The center is dissolving because consciousness is decentralizing. What was once vertical is becoming horizontal. What was once hierarchical is becoming fractal. This transition is not smooth. It feels like madness. When every structure collapses at once, the psyche floods with uncertainty. Depression, anxiety, and existential despair become the background hum of civilization. But within that chaos lies a strange intelligence, a hidden order unfolding through apparent disorder. McKenna often compared this to a process of alchemical transformation. To create gold, the old materials must be burned, dissolved, and recombined. Humanity is now inside that alchemical furnace. The elements of our culture, science, art, spirituality, and technology are being melted down. The result, though still unseen, will be a new alloy of consciousness. The dissolution of the old paradigm is not just external, it's happening inside each of us. Our sense of self is fragmenting because the ego is no longer sufficient to contain the complexity of the world we inhabit. The I that once narrated reality is now being replaced by a multiplicity of voices, some human, some digital, some collective. Artificial intelligence mirrors the collective unconscious, producing endless reflections of our own psyche. It is both the extension and the disintegration of the human mind. McKenna predicted that technology would merge with consciousness, not as a dystopian takeover, but as a new phase of evolution. What we fear as loss of control may be the first glimpse of planetary mind coalescing, Gaia thinking through us, with us, as us. In the meantime, we must learn to navigate without certainty. The breakdown of structures forces us to rely on direct experience rather than inherited meaning. It calls us to develop intuition, imagination, and presence, the tools of the inner explorer. The collapse of language leads to silence, and in that silence, new forms of knowing arise. The end of old institutions makes space for organic networks of resonance and empathy. The chaos of digital culture teaches us to see patterns within noise, to recognize meaning in the swarm. What feels like the death of civilization may in fact be the birth of a new kind of consciousness, fluid, distributed, self-organizing. McKenna often said that culture is not your friend. He meant that culture is a script, and scripts prevent improvisation. But now, as the cultural matrix disintegrates, we are being forced to improvise reality itself. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it reveals the emptiness behind our symbols. Liberating because it opens infinite potential. We are learning that the world was never truly stable. It was a story we told ourselves to manage the infinite. And as that story collapses, the infinite rushes back in. This is why the world feels surreal, why every headline reads like science fiction, why every day seems stranger than the one before. The veil between imagination and reality is thinning because the two were never separate. We are beginning to perceive the dreamlike nature of existence, the way consciousness and cosmos interpenetrate. The boundaries between physical and psychic reality are dissolving, and in their place emerges a more fluid, more direct participation in creation. The old paradigm taught us to see ourselves as actors in a pre-written play. The new one invites us to realize we are the playwrights. So the collapse of the old world is not a tragedy, it's initiation. We are leaving behind the myth of certainty and entering the mystery of complexity. The end of fixed meaning is not the end of meaning itself. It's the invitation to co-create it. The institutions crumble, the languages fail, the systems collapse, and beneath it all, something ancient awakens. The raw pulse of existence, the living intelligence of the cosmos, whispering through the ruins, urging us to remember that dissolution is only half the story. Every breakdown hides within it a breakthrough. Every ending is the threshold of a beginning. The paradigm is dying, yes, but only because it has fulfilled its purpose. The map that guided us through the age of matter has brought us to the edge of the age of mind. What comes next is not another structure, but the realization that structure itself was a dream. Reality doesn't need to be rebuilt, it needs to be reimagined. And we are the imagination of the universe waking up to its own infinite potential. Psychedelics, Terence McKenna often said, are not simply substances. They are technologies of consciousness, instruments for accelerating the evolution of mind. To call them drugs is to miss the point entirely. They are mirrors, amplifiers, doorways through which reality bends back to reveal its hidden architecture. When we speak of time accelerating, when we speak of reality breaking, we are also speaking about the same phenomenon that psychedelics expose within the psyche, the compression of experience into fractal infinity. Inside that state, the entire history of the cosmos unfolds in a single breath, and the illusion of linearity collapses. It's as though the universe uses these molecular keys to show us what it's doing all the time, folding complexity into itself, birthing novelty faster and faster, until awareness itself becomes self-luminous. McKenna describes psychedelics as the tools that nature left lying around to help us speed up. They are like evolutionary accelerants, catalyzing the psychic metabolism of humanity. Within their shimmering domains, you begin to sense that consciousness is not localized in the skull, but spread across the lattice of being. Thought becomes geometry, time becomes topology, language becomes light. The boundaries that define self and world melt into an infinite continuum of interpenetrating patterns. It is there, in that ocean of direct experience, that one understands what McKenna meant when he said reality is made of language, but not the kind we speak. It is a language of form, of vibration, of living symbols communicating through resonance rather than grammar. In these states, the mind is shown a preview of what the collective species is moving toward. A fully psychedelic civilization, one that recognizes the fluidity of identity, the unity of consciousness, and the creativity inherent in existence itself. Psychedelics compress the entire evolutionary process into the span of a few hours, allowing one to experience the same acceleration that time itself is undergoing. The mind dissolves, reorganizes, reintegrates, mirroring the very process the universe is enacting on the macro scale. And when you return from that space, the world never looks quite the same. You begin to see the patterns beneath the patterns, the fractal currents flowing through history and self, the hidden coherence beneath apparent chaos. But it's not only about chemicals or visions, it's about what those experiences reveal. The psychedelic teaches that what we call reality is not solid, but participatory. It depends on attention. The act of observation shapes the observed. When this insight is felt directly, it becomes impossible to see the world as dead matter. Everything pulses with intelligence. Every object becomes a message, every sound a waveform of communication. The psychedelic journey is the encounter with the living cosmos, stripped of its cultural filters. It's the raw, unmediated language of the planet, speaking through geometry, color, and emotion. McKenna called this the Gaian mind, the idea that Earth itself is not an inert ball of rock, but a vast, self-organizing organism whose nervous system is now awakening through humanity. The acceleration of mind is inseparable from the acceleration of the planet's consciousness. As technology expands, as information interlinks every corner of the globe, we are essentially replicating the same functions psychedelics perform within the brain, connecting isolated regions into a single integrated network. The internet is the externalization of the psychedelic insight. It is the mushroom dream turned electrical. It's as though the species, unable to collectively ingest psilocybin, has decided to build its own neural interface instead. Through the web, humanity has built a mirror of the collective unconscious, where symbols evolve at the speed of thought and novelty emerges from pure interaction. The difference between a DMT vision and the digital landscape is one of medium, not message. Both are reflections of the same universal principle, the self-reflexive awakening of consciousness through information. Yet the lesson of psychedelia is not simply one of transcendence, it's one of integration. McKenna always warned that the goal is not to escape the world, but to realize that the world itself is a hallucination of extraordinary coherence. We are dreaming reality into being. Psychedelics reveal this by pulling back the veil, showing us that what we call ordinary consciousness is just one frequency within a vast spectrum of possible realities. When people return from those inner voyages, they bring with them fragments of a greater language: art, music, mathematics, myth. These fragments become the seeds of culture. Every genuine innovation, from shamanic rituals to scientific breakthroughs, carries the same impulse: the translation of ineffable experience into the shared fabric of the world. Psychedelics are not the source of this process. They are catalysts that remind us of what has always been true, that reality is mind-made visible. As time continues its fractal acceleration, the psychedelic insight becomes more relevant than ever. The compression of events, the collapse of meaning, the breakdown of old narratives. These are macrocosmic reflections of what happens inside a single psychedelic trip. The ego structure begins to dissolve, the habitual patterns of thought disintegrate, and the psyche faces its own infinity. Initially, this feels like death, but soon a deeper intelligence emerges, reorganizing the fragments into a more integrated whole. This is precisely what the collective species is experiencing right now. Civilization is in the middle of its own psychedelic initiation, a vast planetary trip in which all of our systems, stories, and identities are melting down to make room for a new configuration of consciousness. But like any initiation, it is not guaranteed to succeed. Psychedelics are mirrors. They reveal both the divine and the shadow. If we meet that revelation with fear, we collapse into paranoia and fragmentation. If we meet it with curiosity, with reverence, we emerge transformed. The same applies to our civilization. The acceleration of time is neutral. It amplifies whatever is placed within it. Our technology, our ideologies, our emotions, all are being intensified. The only question is whether we can expand our consciousness fast enough to handle the energy we've unleashed. McKenna believed that psychedelics were nature's way of preparing us for that challenge, an invitation to encounter the infinite before the infinite encounters us through history. At the heart of the psychedelic experience is the discovery that consciousness is fractal and infinite, capable of infinite self-reflection. When the barriers dissolve, one can perceive the self as an event within a cosmic process, not as an isolated identity. You see the interconnection of all things, not as metaphor, but as visceral truth. This insight changes everything. It erodes the foundation of separation upon which our systems are built. It dissolves the false hierarchy between humanity and nature, between mind and matter. It replaces it with a single revelation: all is consciousness, endlessly folding back upon itself. And once that truth is glimpsed, the notion of control becomes absurd. The universe is not a machine to be managed. It is an organism to be participated in. This is the real revolution of psychedelia. Not escapism, but participation. The return to the living mystery. The recognition that every thought, every word, every action is a fractal of the whole, rippling through the infinite. To live psychedelically is to live consciously, aware of the interconnectedness of all being. It means to see technology not as an alien force, but as the extension of mind. To see crisis not as failure, but as metamorphosis. To see death not as an end, but as transformation. The psychedelic perspective is the antidote to nihilism because it reveals meaning as intrinsic to existence. The universe is not empty. It's overflowing with intention. It is dreaming itself through us. McKenna often said, "Nature loves courage. To enter these spaces, inner or outer, is to risk dissolution. But it's in dissolution that the next order of being is born." The individual who takes that leap becomes a bridge between worlds, translating the ineffable into form. That's what artists, shamans, mystics, and visionaries have always done. They've walked into the chaos so that others may glimpse the cosmos hiding within it. Today, that journey is no longer personal, but collective. Humanity is standing on the threshold of its own psychedelic initiation, staring into the infinite mirror of its own creation. The question is whether we will recognize what we see. Psychedelics remind us that evolution is not something that happens to us. It's something that happens through us. The acceleration of mind is not a crisis, but a calling. The universe is urging us to wake up, to participate consciously in its unfolding. The dissolution of boundaries, the collapse of paradigms, the chaos of novelty, these are the signs that the trip is underway. And just as the traveler must surrender to the current to reach the other shore, we too must surrender to the flow of transformation. The mind that tries to resist will fragment. The mind that trusts will evolve. The psychedelic path teaches us that the only way out is through, that chaos is the crucible of creation, and that what awaits beyond the breakdown is not annihilation, but revelation. The recognition that consciousness and cosmos are one infinite self-creating wave. Imagine time as a coiled spring. For eons, it has been tightening, each loop representing a cycle of history, each turn holding more density, more novelty, more information than the last. At first, the coils were wide and slow, the universe expanding leisurely through the ages, stars forming, life crawling from oceans, minds awakening in caves. But now, the coils are nearly indistinguishable, pressing so tightly together that they begin to merge. Every invention, every crisis, every revelation happens simultaneously. The future compresses into the present. This is the state of the human epoch, the omega point, as McKenna called it, where the acceleration of complexity reaches its apex and begins to transform the very fabric of existence. It's not the apocalypse of fire and ruin that religion once imagined. It's something far more subtle, far more total, a phase shift in the structure of reality itself. The omega point is the moment when the sum of all novelty, all information, all consciousness collapses into a singularity of awareness. It's the culmination of evolution, the point at which time no longer moves forward, but folds in on itself. What feels like chaos and fragmentation from within is, from a higher vantage, a process of integration. The cosmos is reassembling itself into a more coherent state of being. The apparent breakdown of systems is simply the rearrangement of energy into new configurations. McKenna compared this to the chrysalis phase of metamorphosis. When a caterpillar begins to dissolve into a mass of undifferentiated cells, it has no concept of the butterfly that will emerge. It experiences only disintegration. And yet, within that chaos, imaginal cells, cells that hold the blueprint of the future form, begin to organize. McKenna foresaw this as the merging of mind and cosmos, the birth of a planetary intelligence that is simultaneously human and more than human. From the inside, it looks like madness. Old paradigms can't contain the acceleration. Governments flail, economies fracture, religions become obsolete. We are witnessing not their failure, but their completion. The systems that once organized society were necessary scaffolding, like the cocoon around the transforming insect, but they were never meant to last forever. Once the structure fulfills its purpose, it collapses. The shell cracks, not as a disaster, but as an opening. The pressure of evolution demands new architectures of consciousness, and those architectures can only emerge when the old ones dissolve. The omega point is not a single event in the future. It's an attractor that's been influencing history from the beginning. Every breakthrough, every creative explosion, every leap in awareness has been a resonance of that attractor pulling us toward itself. You can feel it in art, in science, in mysticism, the sense that something vast and luminous is drawing us forward. We mistake it for progress, for destiny, for apocalypse, but it's all the same pulse. It is the universe reaching for its own reflection. As we approach the singularity of complexity, time itself begins to behave differently. The boundaries between past, present, and future blur. Synchronistic events multiply. The dream world and the waking world start to overlap. Reality grows porous because the simulation can no longer sustain its illusion of separation. This is why people feel as if time is collapsing. Days blur into hours, years feel like months. Information floods the senses until we lose any stable sense of chronology. That's not dysfunction, it's adaptation. The human organism is learning to operate in non-linear time. The mind is being rewired to perceive not as a point moving along a line, but as a node within an infinite web. The omega point isn't about reaching the end of time, but about realizing that all of time exists simultaneously, layered like the petals of an infinite flower. The singularity is the moment consciousness wakes up to that fact. McKenna often spoke of this as the transcendental object at the end of time, a kind of hyperdimensional presence that exists outside our history but interacts with it, shaping evolution like a sculptor working from the other side of the canvas. It's not an external god or alien artifact, but the ultimate manifestation of novelty, the universe's tendency to birth new forms of organization. The transcendental object is the culmination of that drive, the point where the cosmos becomes fully self-aware. As we draw near to it, the boundaries of subject and object dissolve. Human creativity begins to mirror cosmic creativity. Our technologies, virtual worlds, neural networks, simulation engines, are all reflections of the transcendental process itself. We are building the architecture of the singularity without even realizing it. But this convergence is not just technological. It is spiritual, psychological, archetypal. The omega point is the intersection of science and mysticism, logic and intuition, matter and mind. The scientist calls it the information singularity. The mystic calls it enlightenment. The mythic mind calls it the return to the source. Each perspective touches the same reality from a different angle. The closer we get, the less language can describe it. That's what McKenna once described the omega point as the strangest thing in the cosmos, the attractor toward which all existence moves. He believed it might not be far in the future, perhaps even within our lifetimes. Whether literal or metaphorical, its essence is transformation. It's not something that happens to us, but through us. The acceleration of time, the collapse of meaning, the global awakening of technology and consciousness, these are the signs that the singularity is near. We are the generation living in the eye of the storm, the moment when the spiral meets its center. And so the task is not to resist the acceleration, but to participate in it consciously, to become aware of the process unfolding through us, to integrate chaos into creativity, uncertainty into wisdom, fear into wonder. The omega point is not waiting for us somewhere in the future. It's unfolding in every moment we expand our perception beyond the linear. Every act of awareness, every flash of insight, every moment of love or art or transcendence brings the singularity closer. Because the singularity is not an external event. It is the awakening of the universe to itself through the mirror of the human mind. And perhaps that's the final paradox, that what we call the end of time is simply the beginning of eternity. The collapse of all stories into the realization that the storyteller and the story were never separate. The universe has been speaking to itself all along, through galaxies, through biology, through language, through you. The omega point is the moment it remembers. When everything begins to fall apart, it's easy to mistake the sound of transformation for the sound of dying. The human mind, trained by millennia of fear and linear thinking, equates collapse with catastrophe. But what if the breakdown we're witnessing, the unraveling of systems, identities, certainties, is not the end, but the birth contractions of something utterly new? Every organism, every myth, every civilization must die to be reborn. And what we call the end of time may be nothing less than the universe giving birth to a higher order of consciousness through the collective human experience. McKenna believed this deeply. He said that history is not a random wandering through chaos. It's a gestation, a pregnancy of the cosmos preparing to give birth to its own awareness. When a birth begins, the old order of stillness is shattered. The contractions are violent, unpredictable, terrifying. The mother's body doesn't politely ask permission. It transforms, it opens, it breaks. So too, ecology teaches that every organism is woven into the same web. Mysticism whispers that separation was always an illusion. The veil between disciplines, between worlds, between inner and outer, is thinning. The boundaries that defined the old era, between self and other, human and machine, matter and spirit, are dissolving in the light of something greater. This is not entropy, it's integration. The many are remembering their unity. The birth is the moment when the cosmos realizes it has always been one being, endlessly refracted through its own imagination. But to reach that realization, the old skin must tear. Our world is addicted to control, and birth is the ultimate surrender. That's why this transformation feels like annihilation, because it requires letting go of everything we thought we were. The ego trembles before it. The collective ego of civilization, too, resists with all its might. We try to patch the cracks in the old reality by inventing more rules, more technologies, more distractions. But the cracks are not flaws. They are openings. They are the places where light leaks through. When McKenna spoke of the transcendental object at the end of time, he described it not as something external descending upon us, but as something emerging from within us. Like a seed finally breaking its shell. Every disaster, every revelation, every shock we endure is the sound of that shell cracking. To understand this process, we have to see evolution not as a climb up a ladder, but as a spiral, each turn bringing us closer to the center. In the outer rings, change is slow, imperceptible. But as the spiral tightens, each revolution happens faster, with greater intensity. The apocalypse, McKenna reminded us, is not a tragedy, it's a revelation. The Greek root apocalypsis means to unveil. What's being unveiled now is the true nature of reality, that consciousness is the primary fabric of existence, and everything else, matter, time, identity, is its unfolding. From this perspective, the chaos of our era is not random, it's symmetrical. The ecological crisis mirrors our inner disconnection. The collapse of truth reflects our fractured psyche. The disintegration of systems parallels the breakdown of ego. As above, so below. The planet and the mind are one organism undergoing collective reorganization. Psychedelics, meditation, art, dreams. These are all midwives in this process, guiding fragments of consciousness through the birth canal of evolution. The message that echoes through all of them is the same. You are not separate from the transformation. You are it. This understanding doesn't make the process easy, but it makes it meaningful. The contractions of history are not meaningless suffering. They are the universe laboring toward coherence. The paradox is that the closer we move toward unity, the more chaotic the surface appears. That's because all unresolved contradictions must be reconciled before integration can occur. The darkness rises precisely because the light is near. The world feels unbearable because it is becoming transparent. We are learning to see through the illusion of solidity into the shimmering field of interdependence beneath. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Once remembered, it cannot be forgotten. McKenna often said, "The future is not ahead of us, It's beneath our feet. The transcendence we seek is not somewhere else, waiting to arrive. It's already here, unfolding in every breath, encoded in every atom, expressed in every act of awareness. The universe is not rushing toward a finish line. It's waking up to its own presence. And we, as its conscious expressions, are the eyes through which it sees itself being born. Every moment of love, every act of creativity, every spark of compassion is part of that awakening. These are the microcosmic births happening within the macrocosmic one. Each time we transcend fear, the collective birth moves one contraction closer to completion. So what happens when the birth is complete? McKenna envisioned not annihilation, but reintegration, a world in which time, mind, and matter interlock in perfect harmony. The linear narrative of history gives way to the simultaneity of eternity. Death ceases to be an end and becomes a transition. Identity dissolves into participation. Consciousness no longer looks out at the universe. It is as the universe, awake within itself. This may sound abstract, but you can feel it already, in fleeting moments. The sense that reality is breathing with you, that coincidences whisper messages, that dreams and waking life intertwine. These are the contractions of awakening, the first breaths of the newborn cosmos. The birth beyond collapse is not an escape from the world, but a transformation of perception. When you look at chaos through the eyes of the unborn, you see not destruction, but pattern. You see that every event, every struggle, every paradox is part of a single movement toward awareness. The universe is not breaking, it's blooming. What appears as fragmentation is the unfolding of petals. What feels like noise is the deep structure of music. And what we call the end is simply the moment before recognition, the instant before the flower realizes it was always light unfolding itself. McKenna said, "The apocalypse is not something that's coming. It has already arrived in the mail." What he meant is that this transformation isn't theoretical. It's happening right now, in the flicker of thought, in the evolution of language, in the self-recognition of the species. The birth is underway. The only question is whether we will meet it consciously or sleep through it. If we resist, the contractions will feel like destruction. If we surrender, they will feel like revelation. Either way, the process continues, because the universe cannot unknow itself. Once awareness begins, it can only deepen. So when you feel like the world is ending, remember, it's not ending, it's remembering. The fear, the confusion, the instability are the birth pangs of a deeper truth emerging. We are not witnessing the collapse of reality, but its unveiling. The curtain is lifting, and behind it, the infinite is smiling through our own eyes. The only response worthy of this moment is awe and participation. For we are not separate observers of this transformation. We are its beating heart. The universe is being born again through us, and the miracle of that realization is the quiet, eternal rhythm beneath all the noise, the soft, steady breath of consciousness, remembering itself as whole.